Wage theft, first and foremost, is exploitation. It's a way in which employers exploit workers.
Me han robado mi salario más de 5 veces. A veces me han salido a deber $500, 1,000, 2,000 o hasta $10,000 me han salido a deber.
There is wage theft all around you, and we all interact with it on a daily basis, even though we kind of don't recognize what's going on.
In the United States, 2/3 of low-wage workers report some form of wage theft each week. Join us as we examine the issue of wage theft victims at a worker center, helping them fight for their rights. Today on Big Questions. I'm Kim Clark.
And I'm Pat Werhane.
We go out into the world to look at everything.
Topics such as food deserts, wage theft, and recidivism in jails.
Access to healthcare, education, welfare, major issues we face at home and around the world today.
Come search with us for answers to these issues and more
as we discovered new answers to today's big questions. We're here at the headquarters of Arise Chicago, an organization working hard to empower the victims of wage theft.
Wage theft is an astonishing practice in the 21st century where people who work are not paid or aren't paid fully for their wages. In Chicago alone, there are approximately 1,500 people a week who suffer from wage theft, and it costs in wages about $1.5 million each week.
In Chicago alone?
In Chicago alone,
yeah.
Yes.
Let's go inside and find out more, shall we? Hi, Adam. How are you?
Hello, Adam.
Denying workers wages happens in about a dozen ways. Some very common ways, some very blatant ways, others more sophisticated forms of shaving hours. So for example, simply not paying a worker is one way in which wage theft happens. So you finish a construction site, you're promised upon completion you're going to receive a paycheck, and you just don't get that paycheck.
A los 2 meses me empezaron a dar excusas de que no estaba el patrón para que me pagara, pero nunca se me pagó mi salario.
The most common thing that we see is when workers don't receive the minimum wage, don't receive overtime, are forced to work off the clock.
I was doing the work, but I was not getting paid for the work. When I request the funds for the work or the payment for the work in which I was doing, the management told me that I was a contractor, outside contractor. I never had the opportunity to write him a proposal or a contract for the work.
The biggest dollar values that are stolen really are not paying overtime wages. So if you work more than 40 hours a week, most workers are entitled to overtime pay.
Yo no sabía exactamente hasta que alguien me lo dijo, pero yo trabajaba muchas horas. Estaba recién llegado a Estados Unidos. Trabajaba 70, 80 horas a veces. Y hasta que llegué aquí al centro de trabajadores, entonces yo me di cuenta de que 40 horas eran lo normal.
Let's be really clear too, people sometimes identify wage theft with illegal workers, which seems to me that if you're not paying someone for working, that's still slavery. I don't care who it is. But lots of the people that come here are not illegal. Many of them have problems speaking English, but they're not illegal. And I think that's really an important point. That is an equal opportunity. Wage theft is unfortunately equal opportunity.
And so a lot of employers will simply tell workers, well, you're not covered by overtime, when in fact they are. Or they'll say, well, if you want to get paid overtime, go find another job.
Y me dijo también más que si no quería seguir trabajando, ahí estaba la puerta. Y que afuera había cientos de personas que estaban esperando a que yo saliera para ellos poder obtener mi posición.
Employers getting around paying overtime is they pay the workers for their time, just not the overtime rate. They'll get a check for 40 hours, because that's documentation, right? That's evidence, and they'll get paid in cash for the rest of the time. And this worker came in to show us this. He brought his envelope from work, said, here's my check for my 40 hours, and here is my cash. And we took a photo of that, and again, we hear about that often, but we have this visual is just stuck in my head of this photo we have of this man holding out, his check and his cash. And if that was a sealed envelope, you take a picture of that, that's proof right there of showing how they're violating the law.
One of the things at Big Questions, since we've been covering your work, our audience, and we've got a very bright audience, it's new to them. This is
many people don't know about that. When I bring up that term, they say, what is that? What is that? That can't, and that can't be in Chicago, they say. You must be talking about Bangladesh or someplace. I said, talking about Chicago.
I think the audience, there's a stark difference in terms of audiences, right? If we do a talk, as we frequently do, to a congregation of low-wage immigrant workers, or we to a community group that does social services for immigrants, in low-income areas, if we ask people to raise their hand if they have not been paid the minimum wage, or who have not been paid overtime, or who, we can guarantee that every person in that room will raise their hand when we finish our list. In contrast, I'll speak to a student group. I was just at Loyola University not too long ago, and had asked people about wage theft. There was zero familiarity with it. So I think that there's definitely a stark contrast depending on which group you're speaking with.
Really is.
Although I must say, increasingly we find that people of more privilege are also beginning to feel the squeeze. I think just because the economy is still so bad, it's no longer exclusive to the low-wage sector. It's actually a more generalized issue.
But they don't always use that term. They don't know the term very well.
Right,
It's a term that we need to make more popular.
Yeah, Pat's
so people,
absolutely right.
So that people get it right away. I don't have to explain what wage theft is.
And they're sympathetic pretty quickly. I mean, once they get it,
yes.
boy, they're on target.
Right. I mean, theft is theft. I'm not aware of people who defend theft. Right.
There is one particular case, for instance, that I remember when I was working with day labor workers. The conditions of day labor workers were so bad. A lot of times people didn't even know how much they were being paid.
No me pagaban en cheque, me pagaban en cash y pues desafortunadamente eso ocasiona que muchas veces estemos como que seamos invisibles en ese sentido en el área de trabajo donde estamos.
Really, also just the emotional, mental effects of that, of not having any income, and how do you pay for anything? Not just getting, I haven't been getting paid the minimum wage, I'm struggling to pay my bills, but I've been able to, barely pay my rent, to these guys were all living off credit cards, were deeply in debt, had family members that had medication that they were worried they wouldn't be able to pay for anymore.
Ahorita estamos pagando una casa, pero está muy difícil para pagar la hipoteca de la casa. Yo esperaba pagarlo en los pagos para la casa. Y en esta economía es muy difícil ahorita porque casi no hay trabajo. Necesitamos sobrevivir.
Si mis niños piden algo, pues yo no les puedo comprar nada porque la persona no me dio el dinero. Este año nomás me ha pasado una vez, pero años atrás me ha pasado más veces.
Now, you had said that there might be some new sort of, I don't know how to put it, methods, I suppose, of wage theft, if that's the right word.
Yes.
New ways of not paying people, I guess.
Unfortunately, I think there's no limitations to the creativity of employers who don't take seriously the well-being of their workforce. The most recent thing we've seen, and this actually was identified at a national level. New York Times did a cover story about debit card payments. So paying you rather than paying a paycheck. Or in some of the underregulated industries, what is more commonly paying in cash, they'll actually pay workers in a debit card. And we actually have we recently have one case in Chicago that we've identified where workers were encouraged, not required, but encouraged to use a debit card as their source of payment. But of course, the use of a debit card also includes charges. So after your charges, to use a debit card, it's not a free thing. You have to pay a charge, whether it's a sign-up charge or a monthly charge or a penalty if you don't use it properly. Right. So that is effectively is a cut from your wages, right? That comes directly from your wages. So you could conceivably be earning under minimum wage, even if your employer pays minimum wage, when you're paid in that way.
Why do employers pay people in both debit cards?
My understanding, I'm not an expert on this yet, but my understanding is that there's sometimes a financial incentive. A bank will give a kickback of the fees or some other incentive to an employer if they choose to use their card.
Well, it sounds odd too, because you're going to give them something that's inherently complicated to use. And if the English isn't their first language, or if they don't quite get the system, it's like, here, use this.
Well, that's an excellent point, because for the group of workers we're in Chicago that we met with, they're not English speakers for the most part, nor do they use internet on a regular basis. And that's precisely how you can track your wages then. Because, of course, if we get a paycheck in the state of Illinois, we must have a pay stub, which outlines, what were the hours, if there were legal deductions made, what they are. If you're paid on a debit card, how do you know? And the company said, well, of course, you can just go online. But the problem is people can't go online sometimes.
They don't have any way to go online.
Sometimes there are things happening in workplaces that are not illegal, but are unjust.
Trabajé por 8 o 9 años de cajera en la cafetería. Que los doctores tenían que firmar un papel porque los doctores comen gratis. Le dije que firmara por favor. Entonces mi jefa estaba en la cafetería. Entonces rápido fue y quitó la hoja. Me dijo, tú sabes que él no es doctor, pero yo me sorprendí. Me sentí humillada por la razón de que nunca había hecho nada y para mí es un doctor. Dijo, no es un doctor. Le dije, ok, estoy aceptando que hice un error. El lunes me llaman, voy a la oficina y me dice mi supervisora, dice, estás terminada.
You spend more time at work than you do anything else, right? You spend more time working than you do spend time with your family, more time than you spend sleeping. If you are in a situation in which you are not being treated with dignity, and it's the bulk of your waking life, and not even, I mean, we're talking about bare minimum standards, minimum wage. We're not talking about great benefits, just the bare minimum. I think it really changes your outlook, and that's going to translate how you think about civic life. It's going to translate how you feel about being a citizen or being a resident in your neighborhood.
It had serious effects on me. Any man that goes out and do a 40-hour-a-week a job and expects some type of salary for it and don't get it, it's a very hurtful feeling. You know, if you take a good dog and you put a good dog in a cage and you don't feed that dog and you treat it bad, then eventually that dog would turn bad. And this is a kind of a situation or expression I like to special employment, the way they kind of treat people. They kind of put them in a cage and they pressurize them to a point where they just can't deal with it. It just makes you feel horrible.
There is the sense that you cannot change things. And I think that is one of the reasons why it is important for everybody to get involved. Because just like union members say, right? When one of our members hurt, everybody hurts.
Y yo soy el único sostén en mi familia. Y yo iba a trabajar muy emocionada, me van a pagar y todo, pero al darse cuenta que perdí 18 horas de trabajo y no recibir ningún salario, es algo como que se pone uno a pensar, entonces estoy regalando mi tiempo, estoy regalando mi trabajo.
Yo puse una denuncia a ellos, pero en realidad eso no es denuncia. Cuando alguien está reclamando sus derechos, yo creo que eso no se llama denuncia. Pienso yo que es una palabra que tal vez se puede emplear ahí que se llama justicia.
En realidad yo no quiero nada, yo siento esa impotencia, porque yo siento que no hice nada mal. Eso es mi coraje.
These are delicate scenarios already in which if somebody's not paid, it has a major impact.
Muchas de las personas tienen sus hijos, sus esposos, sus parejas o sus familias y prácticamente ellos conviven más con la familia del trabajo, se están explotando que con su propia familia. Esa es la realidad y es generalizado. Así es de simple.
Of course, we can go back to the famous quote about Ford, right? That
Ford in every driveway.
And that every worker should be able to afford the product. And
really?
And I don't think
that's what the founder of Ford said when he made the Model T, that everyone working at his plant
should be able to afford.
He paid living wage then. He could have paid much less because there weren't many jobs, but he didn't. He was known for paying above living wage.
There was an era of prosperity, I think, based on that philosophy, and so
so he sold a lot of cars.
Yeah, it's a good business model, right?
Yeah.
Once we start talking to people, we often learn about other violations, specifically health and safety. We're focusing a lot on. Workers often don't come for that reason unless it's very severe. They had a really bad accident.
A un muchacho, la máquina de cortar queso se le rebanó casi la mitad del dedo. Y el señor, el patrón, lo llevó al hospital. Lo llevó al hospital, pero los cheques que le tenían que llegar a él, los recogía él y los cobraba.
Cuando se llueve, el basement se hunde así de agua y se tenían que meter en una tina y había un motor del refrigerador cerca de la agua O sea que si pegaba, se convertía en un campo de electricidad. Se maneja la grilla a altas temperaturas, estar constantemente en la lumbre ocasiona ceguera, te lastima la vista. Los extinguidores, y eso lo comentamos en OSHA, los extinguidores no los cambiaba el boss porque eran $300 que le costaba al boss para cambiar los extinguidores. Estás manejando químicos que a veces no tienen ni guantes, ni protección, ni nada.
Why is it that workers don't have the resources to one, find help for themselves, but to prevent injuries at the workplace? But of the people who have suffered an injury in the workplace, only 9% file a claim. I mean, that is problematic in so many different levels, right?
We came across a company recently who said, if you're found to lie, we're going to charge you $50. If
you just lie about anything
regarding to the work. I don't know why you wouldn't just fire somebody if you found that they were a liar and it was interfering with their work.
Yeah.
But this is a way just to make money off of it. Another one, if you receive a promotion, there will be a fee for receiving your promotion.
Well, there's other words for that.
So, it's actually a Japanese way.
Is it really?
In Japanese companies, if you receive a promotion, you often take a slight deduction in wages.
Interesting.
But the idea of a promotion is such you want that. Eventually it'll catch up.
Yeah.
But you often take a wage deduction. But that's not hidden. It's that's going to happen.
Well, this isn't hidden either. They're up front. They say you've become a foreman. You're no longer a loader, and we're going to charge $500 from your paycheck for that promotion. And right or wrong, it's illegal. You can't do that. You can't deduct wages for these types of things. So
what strikes me as odd, though, is that somebody is sitting in their office figuring these systems out.
It's just they have nothing else to do.
Right.
Right.
Absurd.
We had some pizzeria workers that were actually getting paid above minimum wage, like $11 an hour, decent wage, but they weren't getting paid overtime. And in the end, the two of them were owed like $32,000.
Cuando yo empecé a trabajar, despidieron a todas esas personas y me dejaron trabajar nada más a mí. Yo trabajaba 10 a 12 horas por día, porque vieron que estaban gastando mucho más dinero con las 3 personas que lo que iban a hacer conmigo, que se los hacía en 4 o 5 horas.
Los días de mucho trabajo, por decir en Halloween o el Super Bowl, pues trabajábamos desde la madrugada, desde las 3, 2 de la mañana hasta las 8, 10 de la noche. Todo el día y no nos pagaban overtime completo.
Any stories that just really stand out as sort of, I can't believe I heard this, or this is just amazing?
Well, yeah. I mean, sadly, a huge percentage of our job, particularly our organizers on staff here, their job is listening to horror stories day in and day out. Recently, a woman who said she was helping to get a restaurant started. So she was employed to help set up all things at the restaurant, was working close to 80 hours a week.
All right.
And was still awaiting payment. She had been not been paid for
anything?
For several weeks of work at that kind of rate of hours. And when we hear stories like that, it does begin to resemble sort of third world sweatshops or
it is
scenarios.
a sweatshop.
Also with payment schemes like at some of the car washes that we've dealt with. So luxury hand car washes, not like going to a gas station. It's automated.
Right.
But in Chicago, there's a market for people who own luxury vehicles. Will drive into essentially kind of an empty warehouse where there'll be a whole assembly line, some sophisticated machinery, maybe 30 workers employed in that space. Many workers who we've spoken to in the car wash industry will be paid piecemeal. So they'll get paid by the car, or an incredibly low rate, below the tip minimum wage rates, maybe $2 an hour plus tips. Wow. So conceivably, if you're in that workplace and you happen to not get good tips that day, or there happen to not be that many cars coming in that day, we have members who have come home from work in the car wash industry, almost without exception. It's 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. That's pretty much the standard we've identified. And you could come home with $25 after a 10-hour shift.
Oh.
And our members have shared that they in fact have done that.
That's backbreaking work.
That's backbreaking work.
It sure is. And another car wash not far from our office, the policy is you don't get paid until the first car you wash. This is a real example. Our members shared with us, okay, so I got in at 6:45, clocked in at 7, And the first car didn't show up until 10:30.
Oh, boy.
My payday began at 10:30, he told me. Wow. So that was the first car he completed. Upon completion, that's when they clocked
Cash
in.
starts rolling in at that point.
Well,
So,
not rolling, sounds like.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, there's just a lot of.
When it's a very large amount of money or an injury, like workers' compensation, it's very complicated. Those we do often refer to attorneys. But for most wage theft cases, what we see is most effective, works the fastest, is most empowering for the workers, and has the most worker involvement is a direct action.
Hacemos un grupo de personas y vamos y nos paramos enfrente de los restaurantes o de los car wash o de las fábricas y los dueños, los que le deben dinero a los trabajadores, muchas veces prefieren mejor pagar porque no quieren mala publicidad.
So how do you see the future of this? We just go on and on.
Right.
We're all idealists and think that that we can't imagine this continuing to occur, but it will.
I believe that these individual campaigns that we do in isolation will not be effective. So we now are active with 4 national networks in either research or advocacy or worker organizing, occupational safety and health. So that level of coordination is bringing some strength and broader visibility for the work.
Sure.
We find ourselves moving more into some of the public policy debates, right? The city ordinance was the very first one. First time that we went into that foray as a lead organization. We had supported legislation in the past, but this was the first time that we really brought out our members to really testify and educate legislators about it, right? So that was an important move that I feel like it should be able to make a broader difference than the sum of all of our individual workplace campaigns.
We don't think about this. We go to a restaurant and we're served our food, and we're looking to have good service and good food, and we don't always think about, I leave a really great tip, but is that person really getting it? Especially if you're paying with a credit card, ask your server, if I tip you on my credit card, will you get the tip? Ask when you're going places. Sometimes we're at the store, or at you're getting your car fixed. Just, you can ask the worker sometimes, how do you get paid here? Are you getting paid well?
Certainly talk to workers about what the conditions are like. It's sometimes difficult from a consumer standpoint probably to connect with a worker who may or may not be comfortable talking to you, but workers will speak up in some instances, and it's important to ask, I think.
Me he dado cuenta que no soy yo el único. Hacer todo esto personalmente me ha dado fuerzas para que otras personas se den cuenta de que cuando pasa algo así, hay puertas que tocar para tratar de buscar ayuda y no quedarse uno callado.
Entonces yo conversé con ese muchacho que seguía trabajando ahí y me dijo, no, vieras que alguien puso una denuncia allá a la compañía y dijo esto y esto y esto, y ahora por eso nos están pagando a todos, con lo que es la ley del pago de overtime, vacaciones, todo nos están pagando bien hoy, dice, no hay problemas. Y yo le pregunté a él, ¿y tú sabes quién es que hizo eso? No, solo dicen que fue un trabajador ahí, pero no sé quién es. Y más no sabía él que era yo el que había puesto esa denuncia.
This is really the kind of issue, though, that should be of interest with a broader spectrum of society. I genuinely believe as we lift up those at the bottom of the economic ladder, it has a beneficial impact on those above them. If we're able to raise the minimum wage, a supervisor at a fast food restaurant who makes 35 cents more than those he's supervising, not an uncommon scenario. If those who he's working get a bump in the minimum wage, what happens to his salary? It's also going to go up.
Oh, that's interesting.
And what happens when suddenly the workers of a factory producing something are able to start purchasing some of the things they're purchasing, right?
Exactly.
So, there is an effect here, and I think that those, even the employer class, there is a self-interest there, right?
Yes.
That, it's not necessarily antithetical to their success.
So I think that this is a wake-up call, looking at a lot of loopholes that we know exist in the laws, how they're applied to different groups of people. We know who the vulnerable workers are. We know what the industries that are committing these violations are. So there is a lot of room, for being proactive and creative in terms of how the laws are being reinforced.
It's the only way to do business. That's certainly one position that employers will tell us. And I really don't have sympathy for that way of thinking, because if you're getting into business, business is business. If you succeed or you fail, anyone should be able to start their own business, which is really the spirit of the United States, I think, is that you have to recognize the flip side of that is that the reality is most people do fail at their entrepreneur endeavors. That's what competition is, and I see it very clear-eyed. I don't think that we can make exceptions for some people to be exploiting workers just so that they can feel like they're operating their business at a level they'd like to.
The fact that people aren't getting their wages is a significant contributing factor to why people and families are poor in this nation. And so if we want to address poverty, we ought to be addressing wage theft.
There's a lot of other things happening right now in society that I think are signs of hope. One of them certainly being the retail and fast food workers who nationally have been coming out to protest their low wages.
Yes.
And it really opens the conversation up to be able to talk about not just wage theft, but low wages in general. And the idea that all work should be dignified work. I think that boosts our work, but it also, it's a sign that we may be just around the corner from some broader changes.
Wage theft is almost an invisible crime. Most of you watching this program won't have heard of it, and yet often we see that in restaurants, we see that in fast food places, we see that sometimes in warehouses. It happens all over the city in places that all of us go.
And workers are coming together, and they're winning. Here at Arise Chicago, they're doing wonders to help that out. We want to thank them today for helping us understand the problem a little bit more, and thank you for being part of the discussion on big questions.